about fats? Well, there's different types. I call them the good, the not so good, and the really terrible. And so let's look at the good ones first. And we call these good fats our essential fats. And interestingly, most Western diets are lacking a diet that consumes these essential fats. These essential fats are our omega-3, omega-6, and omega-9. Omega-3 fats we find them in oily fish, and we also find it in flaxseed and in some other nuts. These fats, omega-3, have anti-inflammatory properties. And by that, they almost play the same effect as when you take medicine that reduces inflammation in the body. But they do this in a way without any of the nasty side effects. And we know that in many, many studies, that when people have a diet that is rich in omega-3, they are less likely to have depression. Or if they switch and have more of the omega-3 fats in their diet, they are more likely to be able to reduce their symptoms of depression. The second fat is omega-6. And we find this in lots of nuts and seeds, so almonds, Brazil nuts. We find it in eggs. And these fats are very helpful for our hormones. They're very helpful in especially the female hormones. And for some people, it's female hormone changes that can often trigger symptoms of depression. So these omega-6 fats have been shown to really, really help too. We've also got omega-9. We find that in avocado, extra virgin olive oil, those Mediterranean type of foods, lots of nuts as well and seeds. These omega-9 have been shown to really, really help our insulin levels. And if you recall, insulin plays a massive role in how our body manages blood sugar and blood sugar fluctuations, which are associated with depression. So these omega-3, 6 and 9 are all very useful fats when you combine them that have very, very potential properties to assist in preventing and managing depression. We also have other fats. We have saturated fat. And a lot of people fear saturated fat because in the past it's been linked with cardiovascular disease. Now, saturated fat, too much of it, can be inflammatory. By that, it is associated with high cholesterol levels or symptoms of lots of different conditions, including depression. But we need a little bit of saturated fat. Imagine your cell, the circular cell, each one that we've got in our body, has a membrane on there, and that membrane needs to be solid enough to hold the cell together, but it needs to be fluid enough to let things in and out so the cell can do its job. So the fluidity comes from those essential fats. Think of those oils and those fats at room temperature are liquid. And then they need to be solid enough to hold the cell together, where we get that from the saturated fats. So what we're trying to do is get a balance, and we get saturated fats from animal products. So we get those from butter, from meat, from dairy, from cheese. So we need a little bit of that, but just not too much. And we find a typical Western diet has a lot of the saturated fat, but very little of those essential fats. And then the final fat, which I said was the bad guys, is we call them trans fats or hydrogenated fats. These are fats that have been altered. They've been chemically altered to give them a long shelf life or to make them taste nice. I always say if you think about a packet of digestive biscuits, they've got a shelf life, 3 months maybe, before you've opened them at least. But if I was to make some digestive biscuits with some rolled oats and a bit of sugar and some flour and some butter at home, they're not going to last more than 3 or 4 days if we're lucky. Why is that? Well, that's because the fats in biscuits and packets of biscuits and cakes and things we see on the shelves that have a long shelf life have been chemically altered. And that chemical alteration that's taken place, we know is bad for the body. And it is those that are linked with conditions, with inflammation, with illness, with disease. So to summarise the fats, what we're trying to do is get more of the essential omega-3, omega-6, omega-9 fats from fish, nuts, seeds, and have a limited amount of our saturated fats, which we get from our animal products, our meats, and our dairies. But really, where possible, try to avoid those trans fats. And that's where you see government guidelines saying try to eat oily fish 2 to 3 times a week. As nutritionists, we absolutely support that because that's a really good way to get those in. And we find that these diets, which we call the traditional Mediterranean diet, and I emphasize the word traditional because the modern day Mediterranean diet is very much pizza, pasta related. But the traditional Mediterranean diet, those ancestors would have been eating fish. They would have been having lots of vegetables, a little bit of potato. Their dessert would have been fruit, nuts and seeds. Their salads would have been loaded with lots of nuts. They would have had extra virgin olive oil sprinkled over it. There would have been avocado in there. That Mediterranean diet that emphasised on those good fats, those low and slow releasing carbohydrates with plenty of good protein from animal and non-animal sources. We see when people adopt that diet and we shift people from a typical Western diet to that traditional Mediterranean diet, they go on to not only have lower rates of depression, but they weigh less. They've got less likely to go on to get diabetes or cardiovascular disease. People who adopt those kind of diets not only are less likely to go on to get depression, but are more likely to be able to reduce some of their symptoms.